Welcome, Annette. Thank you for being here on Chat Off the Mat.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Just to let the listeners know a little bit about yourself, can you tell us about your background and also what started you on this healing journey, traveling the world, and eventually writing your book?
Thank you. So I was born in Germany and into, let's say, a quite complicated childhood home. And I think that starting pad, there was so much suffering and so much pain, really pressed in on myself from very, very early on. I suffered, which I didn't know back then. Of course, today I can give it names, but really from a profound lack of belonging. And together with, I think, a very innate attitude for devotion, these two strands of the suffering and the devotion to something that is maybe invisible, a sense of presence that I could feel in nature, all of that sort of set me a little bit on the path of becoming a seeker for belonging, a seeker for true connection, a seeker for relieving suffering in myself. And so that was the starting point. And I left my country when I was 21 years old. I moved to Spain. There was a sense of in Southern Europe, there's a little bit more, the culture is a little bit more heart-centered, you could say, or even family-focused. And in my native culture, Germany, I really struggled with this emphasis on productivity and duty and cerebralness and all of that. And so I really needed to leave to not just reinvent myself, but even feeling who am I when I'm stripped of, that familiar environment. And that was the first starting point. And then with time, I saw wherever you go, there you are. And I suffered quite a lot from depression. And the first time those bouts of depression lifted when I found myself in a yoga and a Tai Chi class years later in Spain, in Madrid, where I lived and I was studying. And it was for the first time that someone had given me the instruction to place my attention somewhere else than just being hijacked, by the negative chatter of my mind and the continuous rumination and the self-doubt. So there was a first opening in the sense of, that we can do something with our attention. And from there, things started to unravel. And I think there was a deepening of my hunger and a deepening of, I want to understand more about the mind. I want to understand more about, the human experience, how we can decode it and how we can find contentment or a sense of deep okayness within ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, and you and your travels took you to many, many places, and it most many times, and it was I find it quite brave that you did that you ventured off on your own, and many times that you didn't have money or you sought places to live, and but you were so inspired in a way to just pursue this understanding or to uncover an understanding, a deep understanding of yourself, and that kept you on your journey and you just kept going and going and living that experience and I find that fascinating. Thank you. Do you feel that a part of your upbringing, you talk about lack of belonging, about it was like maybe some aspects you felt abandoned in a way by maybe family, your environment, your culture, and you realized that, so you needed to connect with nature and maybe the teachings themselves, and that's why what drew you away from your environment?
I believe today that I hadn't even really landed in my body. So the circumstances at home, so my own parents' unresolved trauma, both of them growing up, my father was older, but during Second World War and my mom more post-war Germany, there were so many factors and their own upbringing that didn't allow them to be as present and as consistent or protective as, a child, as we say in Good Enough Parenting by Winnicott. There wasn't enough good enough parenting. So there was also for my psyche, you can say, there was very little ground, because for us to really starting to rest within ourselves, we need to have a bodily felt sense of safety. And that was not something that was given in my environment. And it's not so much that my parents didn't want that, but it was just my father became a high functioning alcoholic. My mother is diagnosed as borderline. So there were just not enough positive protective experiences for me to really feel here is where I am. Even here's where I start, here's where I end. I had literally almost no boundaries. So there was a lot of turmoil, uprootedness and pain within that. I think there was just, for me, for whatever reasons, we all have different strategies around our trauma, right? How we cope with that.
Coping,
Right.
how
Yeah.
people cope differently.
Yes, and for me it was the escape forward.
So I was going to say that it was almost when I read your book at the beginning, I felt this sense of escaping, which is not a bad thing. I
Mm-hmm,
mean,
mm-hmm,
you really tuned into that inner compass, that guidance that told you that you needed to leave here in order
mm-hmm,
to experience your and unpack what you needed, and it brought you all the way to where you are now, full circle to a teacher, teaching others on how to do that as well. And you talk about suffering, and as I'm hearing this, suffering as a teachings in the Buddhists, we talk a lot about suffering. And I wrote here as a question, like, do people hold on to suffering as a coping mechanism or through conditioning? Now, you took that suffering, you didn't hold on to it, and you didn't escape it. You went on a journey to figure it out. Like, what is this
mm-hmm,
suffering I'm experiencing? Do you feel sometimes people hold on to that suffering because they're so familiar and that they don't know how to break free or
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I
remove
think,
themselves?
right, yeah, I don't think any of us does it with their right heart and mind, holding on to suffering. However, there's so little tools. There's so few conversations of how can we actually relieve suffering and what suffering is. So in my experience, working with clients and in my own experience, I don't think anybody likes to suffer. And I know there's sometimes some people say, "Oh, you're just holding on to it." And I don't find that. It's just we don't know any better way. And
Yeah.
once we understand, right, the mechanisms, then we have a pathway out. And even then, as you probably also, right, in our own lives, it's not just seeing it once, right? There's sort of like a practice that we need where we walk ourselves out of suffering again and again and again.
Yeah.
And and there are different tools for that, right? Yeah.
Yeah. It's not a one time and the suffering is over, because as you start to unpack and you work with one particular thing that you've
Strand.
suffered, right?
Mm-hmm.
Something else becomes uncovered,
Mm-hmm.
a way that I think modern language around suffering is core wounds. A lot of people talk about the core wounds. And, my parents also came from Italy during the World War. So World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And I relate a lot to your story about how their conditioning was reflected in their parenting as well. And they didn't know any better because that's how they were raised, right? But a lot of women, and maybe women our age, which is a lot of my audience, we came from that environment where people, had parents that didn't know how to correctly parent or parent the way they did. And maybe they didn't have the tools. Today we have the internet and we could find all these teachers. But
That's right.
but it's not too late. I mean, you embarked on your journey at 21. You went and traveled and learned from teachers all over the world. But there are women who are older and maybe have yet to really recognize that they've suffered and that it's not too
Mm-hmm.
late to learn and to find the right
Mm-hmm.
teachers.
Yeah, I totally agree. And also, I need to say we don't have to travel the world. Luckily
Right.
today, right today, a lot is available, and it's amazing how many resources are available online, and also how many quite solid teachings are available, as well as therapy and, your Qigong teacher, yoga, meditation. right? It's no longer this thing that you have to find somewhere on a mountaintop or in the east, thousands of miles away. So that's one thing. And the second thing is wherever we are is a good place to start. And ultimately, all that we have to deal with is this present moment. And of course, yes, we want to plan. Yes, we need to make arrangements. But I think even with suffering, it's really helpful to see, okay, what is my experience right now? And what is here? And how can I relate to my experience so that there's space around it, or I can probably learn to sit with a particular sadness that before I didn't have the capacity to sit with, and letting myself actually be with the experience cleanly versus trying to cover it over or telling more stories about it. So all that we ever have to deal with is really in this moment, and a lot of suffering has to do with that. And I'm not saying, let's say, unnecessary suffering. I don't want to even go into living in a war zone and
Right.
physical pain, chronic physical pain, and so on and so forth. But this psychological suffering that so many of us, are inflicted by, that's something we can work with. And we don't need to look for the future. We can look in the moment of how we can disentangle that.
Yeah. And I think having the practices, it strengthens our ability to move through that suffering as well, like you said, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's important to have that practice. But I wanted to talk more about that certain practices later. Yeah. So yes. Thank you. Thank you for that. That's important. I want to talk a little bit about true connection. You talk about true connection. I think that it may even be one of the tools to help us with the
Mm.
suffering. Talk about what your definition of true connection is.
Mm-hmm. So I think I like to use an analogy. I like to use the analogy of the ocean, and to understand sort of the territory of our inner landscape, also the territory of reality, you could say. So if we look at an ocean, we tend to look only at the surface level, right? We see the waves, we see the weather patterns, we see, choppy waves, pleasant weather pattern, and so on and so forth. And that's where I think most of us just look at the surface level of reality, and we look at certain emotions I have or certain things that happen. And we also experience ourselves. If we just at the surface level of reality, we experience ourselves exclusively as this independent wave, right? There's this wave of Rose, there's this wave of Annette, there's the wave of my husband. And as long as we believe that life is just this, these separate waves on this vast ocean, it feels quite disconnected. There's always a lot of struggling and reactivity with whatever's going on. And then when we go a little below the surface level of the waves, we come to, there's some energies like these oceanic currents, the flow of energy, which you could say is our basic sense of aliveness. And I think all of us right now can even tap into, well, how does my energy feel today? Do I feel vibrant? Does my energy body feel depleted? And no right or wrong, just noticing, right? Is it calm? Is it frizzled? Is there restlessness? And that's sort of the dimension of our own being, of reality, that you deal a lot with as a Qigong teacher, right? Is the Qi or
Yeah.
prana, they would say. And then when we go all the way, if we could imagine we would go all the way to the bottomless depth of the ocean, we notice that underneath it all, there's something that's incredibly quiet and undisturbed. And that's the dimension of our own being, that even as we talk, and even as our mind is chattering, and even as we have, grief or sadness and problems to solve, but something within us is profoundly at rest. And it's similar to the experience of when we go to sleep and we have the deep, deep, dreamless sleep. We really come to rest in this essential beingness where we stop being a somebody who tries to be happy. We stop trying to avoid suffering at all costs. There's something that is just so. And that for me, is a hallmark of true connection, that we familiarize ourselves with these different dimensions of our being, so that also from where we source ourselves in daily life doesn't need to be from just a disconnected place of I'm just this mortal human being struggling to understand life. No, there's something deeper within all of us, and big part of spiritual practice is about remembering that, recognizing that basic okayness, and then familiarizing ourselves so it becomes more and more like a part of our identity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally understand that. The way I phrase it is that we return to a sense of self.
Yes.
And we because we get so disconnected from that because of day-to-day chaos and all the trauma, or even not even trauma, just anything, the
Hmm.
smaller challenges in life. And then we forget those pieces of ourselves, and we need to remember them and
Yeah.
to continue. I feel that art, because we don't look at we like to look outside of ourselves when we are suffering and when we need help, but a lot of that strength comes from inside. And when I read your book, I felt that strength and that resilience that you had
Mm.
overcoming all those situations and, going through your journey. And you've met a lot of teachers in your life, some that were very helpful and some that taught you some lessons. And now that you're a teacher as well. And so in your book, at the end, you talk about this. I have it here. Sorry. The golden, holding someone's inner golden, and you took
Mm.
gold. And I love that analogy, but it does come from a Jungian analyst, Robert Johnson, that you took that, and I love that. I'm going to share that with my students. But it's about being a teacher and having a relationship with a student. Can you share a little bit about like that importance of that connection, but also the importance of that having that autonomy, like as a student, and not relying solely on the teacher's teachings?
Mm. Right. Yeah. So first, I never call anybody a student, and not that there's anything wrong. I always call people clients, and I have to say there are different ways of how one can uphold the role of a teacher. So I'm very non-traditional. If we would go into different traditions, whether it's Sufism or Tibetan
Right.
Buddhism or this or that, right? There are certain ways of how also different traditions say a teacher should be. And I am non-traditional in the way of that I've found that many of the ancient ways that often come from East, from very different cultures than our Western culture, can often be almost counterproductive for us Westerners. I think as Westerners, we have a very different type of wounding. We can say, yes, we all have the different mind, we all have the same minds, how it works and how it produces suffering. But there is something in our culture. And I think one particular way in which our modern Western culture's suffering is held together is by this incredible emphasis on accomplishment, on productivity, on externals. And so there is very little value given to what we call, that beingness. Or let's say you go to certain cultures where the sacred, whether you want to call it spirit, God, whatever name you want to give it, is so interwoven in everyday life. There are rituals. There are so many ways of how our psyche, our mind can orient towards something that's beyond this everyday person that struggles to, become happy. So having said that, I think many of us suffer from so much more sense of worthlessness. So then there's also then more a propensity towards projecting perfectionism or projecting an all healing mother figure, all healing father figure outside of ourselves, so that this pain, right, that we feel inside, this disconnect, hopefully can be just, made
Go away.
yeah, go away, go away. Exactly. So, but back to your question. So me, I find myself, I'm more of a spiritual friend or a mentor. And I think what's really important for me is that I humanize myself. So, and I think this is also part why I wrote the book, even though originally I wanted to write a manual and wanted to, hand down, pass on practices, inquiries that I find really helpful. And then it became very clear, oh my God, I have to write something personal. And thought then also this is a fantastic way of sharing, the trials and tribulations, the pitfalls, on this awakening journey. And also really showing that, we all struggle. No one gets a free ride, and that there's a way of how everything can be worked through. So I think humanizing ourselves as guides, right? And hopefully creating containers, creating conversations where there's not too much of a power differential. I think these are sort of really important pieces for me when I facilitate and when I teach.
Oh, I love that. I agree. I love the term guide. I love the term mentor. I use that myself because I think that I don't feel I'm above or below. Everybody's on the same level, right? We're all here.
Mm-hmm.
We've all suffered. We've all are learning. We're all on the same path. And I also feel that we learn from our students, quote unquote students, or the people that are in our container of practice. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
That was great. One of the you have a ceremony in your book towards the end of the book, so I encourage everyone to read the whole book. Please don't skip any parts because they all build on one another in the chapters. But at the end, you were guided to do a ceremony where you picked up twigs along the beach and ceremoniously, and each twig represented a teacher. Can you talk about that? I don't want to share your story because this is your story. Can you tell us a
Mm-hmm.
little bit about that in the context and how how one can do that to release certain things, or
Right.
connections?
Good. So when I tend to teach for a week, like I have week-long retreats and, shorter workshops and things, but when I tend to facilitate a week-long retreat, I always like to end the week with the participants having a ceremony, having a ritual. I have different ones. In the book, I'm describing this particular one with a twig, where they get to see what they might have projected, not just onto me during the week, because it's so easy, right? I'm there to facilitate. I know what I'm going to say. And so it looks like, oh my God, she is just so whatever, right? We all tend to have this comparative mind. And so quickly we can sort of look at someone and thinking they have it all together or they know so much and they're so wise. So I'm having these ritual where people get to reclaim the inner gold that they have left with somebody else, whether it's me, whether, in this ritual where they find all a twig for each of their teachers. And a teacher is not just, a guide or a therapist or a spiritual mentor. A teacher can be, that good friend that we had, but then we felt betrayed and they're still holding a piece of us, or, a parent, and so on and so forth. So the ritual is about taking a half a day and finding twigs for any person where you still feel there's something hanging there. And particular where you feel there's something hanging there, thinking, you see they are ahead of you, or, they're so much wiser, or they have so much strength, and you can't find this in yourself. And the idea is of, naming those things and claiming them. And there are different steps, which I didn't go
Yeah.
in full length in the book about, but how you can feel that quality within yourself and recognize, oh my God, this is also within me. It's not just out there. They're just reflecting that gold back, but it's about owning it. So we burn then the twigs in the ritual, which is sort of, I let go of that projection. I sever that energetic
Yeah. The
entanglement.
cord. Yep.
Yes. Yeah. So I bring it back to myself. Yeah. I claim my inner gold. Yeah.
And you had a very powerful experience from that. So now you teach that to others, and I love that, and I just love rituals, and I think that one's really powerful because if I could share, just I too feel that I've learned so much on my journey from many people, but oftentimes I'm still seeking the teachings of someone else. But once I am in their presence and listen to them, I'm like, I know this stuff. I
Mm,
already know this. I've already embodied this. What else am I seeking? So
mm,
I'm starting to I've been reflecting on that,
mm,
before I want to connect with someone else, I ask myself, is this the right person? Am I going to learn something different? Perhaps I am. Or am I just not recognizing within myself that I have the tools that I need on this
Mm-hmm.
journey too? And we can always
Mm-hmm.
learn new things,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Uh,
There's no end.
No, no end. I mean, I see you and I'm like, I would love to be in your presence during this fire ritual, and I'm going to try to manifest that someday. So I would love to learn from you. It's just your story inspires me. I want to talk about the somatic trauma or attachment therapy because you work with that or you do that. And somatics is a word that's tossed around a lot. Can you talk
Mhm.
about that and what you do in that?
Sure. So, somatic comes from soma, and that's the Greek word for body, and it's the pair together with the psyche. So, psyche and soma. And when we say we work with the body, we mean the embodied brain, we mean the nervous system, or if we would look at the East, like you from your background with Qigong, or from my Tibetan Buddhism background, we would say we work with the subtle energy body. But why is that so powerful? Working with the body, whether it's nervous system, energy, or we understand it as the survival brain that's wired all through the body, is because thoughts have a somatic attachment. So whatever thought I entertain, whatever thought I think, has sort of an impact on my energy body. But also the other way around, so much of what we are trying to achieve, sort of a sense of contentment or peace or having a clear mind, if we just work only with the mind, we just sort of work with one one third and two third of the iceberg right underneath seem to be unaddressed. So when we include the body, and what I mean is also our embodied feeling, physical sensations in our practices, we start to get in touch with experiences, unprocessed experiences, blockages. We start to feel certain knots, you can say. And we can start to work with those knots instead of just looking at the content of our mind and learning, nurturing our capacity to track what is going on in the body. Is my body in a fight response? Is my body in a flight response? Is my nervous system collapsed? Is it depressed? So there's a very vast territory where we can sort of walk gently in and disentangle certain organizations that keep us stuck in sense of dis-ease, we could say,
Yeah.
and also ignorance in a certain way. So when I started to study and train in working through the body with attachment trauma, and attachment trauma means trauma of early bonding experiences, I very quickly saw how it is in this early bonding experience of how our caregivers handle, us as an infant, how they talk to us, how they hold us, how they how they cherish us or not,
Yeah.
right?
How they
This
nurtured us.
how they nurtured us or the lack of that, that has a deep imprint on this internal sense of self, the sense of self that feels, oh, this is how love feels like. Love feels just extremely austere, or love feels punishing, or love feels I'm on my own. So there are implicit memories in our subtle body, implicit memories laid down in our body that become like a wallpaper in our everyday life. And what I mean by that is we don't notice anymore that these experiences are there, and they're actually largely influencing how we feel about ourselves, how we feel about the world, and even the relationships that we seek, and relationships, how we experience them. So we need to go into that
Right.
territory in order to make explicit what has been there and laid down like a blueprint for who we think we are and what do we believe we deserve.
Because your body does give you that feedback. And right, it's being aware. I teach that in my classes too. What are some practices that you do or that people can maybe begin? I know yoga is one of the practices, and qigong or meditation. Yeah.
Hmm.
Are there any other practices that a person can maybe get curious about?
Well, I have to say, I became a yoga teacher. And if I look back at my early days of a yoga teacher, even though I was, very interested, passionate, diligent, and practice, I could see how I still was so disembodied. So we could do any amazing practices, meditation, and so on and so forth, and still remain somewhat, dissociated. But also our culture tends to really foster cognitive bypassing.
Yeah.
Yes, we're able to talk about everything, but we're actually not fully feeling it. We don't create a relational home for the experience that we are having. And that's something that we do need to practice. Even when we don't have trauma, I don't believe anybody is free of that because life, is traumatizing to a certain degree. But here's an important practice or important inquiry, and it is quite simple, which is learning to find some sense of safety within ourselves, moment to moment. And I want to offer this to our listeners, even if we cannot find maybe safety within our own body in a moment, we can allow ourselves to maybe look around in the environment where we are seated right now. And as you listen, and let your eyes maybe catch something that looks soothing or looks beautiful. It might be a piece of art. It might be a photo. It might be a plant. It might be the color of your wallpaper, something that feels, yeah, let me just rest there. And allowing our eyes to rest on that visual object that feels pleasant or neutral or calming, just for maybe 10, 20, 30 seconds, just allowing it to sort of come in and then feeling, tracking in your body. Where can you feel that effect? Does maybe something soften in you, or does something come to settle? And then staying with that which feels settling or soothing or coming down and really savoring that for a moment. And that is sort of like a very simple way of coming back to a baseline of safety. And this is an important platform because when we have this as a everyday little practice of bringing myself back to a regulated sense of self, helping my nervous system to settle, then also we create more a carpet of, you could say, of greater resilience, from
Mm.
which then we have a bigger capacity to then spend time with other parts of ourselves that feel restless or that are in pain or feeling grief and feeling sadness, because we do need some sense of some window of tolerance in order to mindfully, consciously engage with difficult experiences. And that's something that is just part of life. Difficult experiences or unpleasant, they will not stop. There's both brutal and the beauty and the
Yeah.
pleasant and the unpleasant. There's no way
Yeah.
around it as long as we're in a body.
Yeah, and your voice was very soothing, and you're just giving yourself permission. Also, even if you're not, if your nervous system isn't dysregulated at the moment, even just to give yourself a gentle pause throughout the day.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. It's a radical act to
It's a radical
slow
act.
down. Yes. To slow down and say, whoa, what is going on around me is what it is. And I need to take responsibility. It doesn't matter how lovely the teachers are, how amazing it is to read books. We do need to practice this. And this is sort of where we really need to understand that freedom is something that, comes from within. Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful. And I know you encourage meditation, or meditation has been a big practice for you for a long time, as have I. And I have found that my meditation practice changes over time, and sometimes I detach from it or forget it. But there is importance in having that meditation. What have you discovered through your own personal practice, or maybe seeing how it has impacted or affected others, even a 5 minute meditation practice, because it's not as difficult as what people think.
Yeah. And also, meditation is just one word, but it can mean so many different things to so many people. I think the most important thing for myself has been, am I worth it? Because for many years, I also struggled with, consistency. And it's not even consistency or discipline. It is, I would not show up for myself, meaning I thought everything else was more important, or distracting myself versus really showing up for my own happiness. And I don't mean haha happiness, but sort of like, yeah, I deserve this peace and I deserve this time to work with my experience, because no one out there will be able to give that to me. So it had a lot to do, like, I'm worth it. I'm worth it this time to sit down and practice. So that's one thing. And the second thing about meditation, right? Again, mindfulness has become a household name, but there's so much more than just mindfulness, and mindfulness can go deep and wide and is profound. Maybe what we could bring in here for our listeners is that often meditation, we think of it as something to do, right? We think like meditation is now the act of sitting down and being on the chair or the cushion and watching the breath, or becoming aware of the stream of thoughts and naming it and so on and so forth. But we could say that meditation is actually our true nature. I think in the deepest sense, the practice of meditation was always about waking us up to what is already wakeful inside, what is already okay and complete and at peace within us. And another aspect of meditation is really learning to come into relationship with our experience in a healthier way. So instead of falling completely under the spell of our experiences, I'm grieving these last few weeks a lot, because there's a tremendous loss in my personal life right now. So grief for me is no longer problem. It's sort of like a wave that I am able to feel with, and I can feel it quite cleanly, and then it expands and it feels tenderizing, and there's a sort of a befriending to an aspect of life that there will be loss, right? But if I look back at how maybe 30 years ago I would have dealt with a loss like this, for one, I would not have allowed myself to feel grief, because I grew up in a grief illiterate family. There was no grieving. You just get through, you soldier through, right? So being in relationship with the pains, the losses in our life, the challenges versus making it then this means there's something wrong with us, requires sort of some practice where we can be in relationship with what's happening without drowning in it, but also not ignoring and suppressing and dissociating. And that's a big part of meditation practice. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for explaining it that way. And I think part of it is also giving yourself a little bit of compassion when you are going through some of these very deep emotions. And I agree with you. I think for me, I've suffered through a lot of grief in my life too, but my practices have helped me to just deal with them better, and know it's part of life, and
Hmm.
not become the victim, and not lose myself,
Hmm.
and not fall down and become depressed. I
Hmm.
know how to be, to
Hmm.
just be.
Yeah.
Very lovely. Thank you. Um, is there anything else that you would like to share or talk about?
Yeah. Nature.
Yes, let's talk about
I
nature.
I do want to bring in nature, because nature was and is such a big part of my healing journey and the sense of well-being. But I do believe also that we do need a different relationship with nature as a, collective humanity. Nature, for most of us in modern cultures, yes, we appreciate it. We go for hikes. We all know how nourishing it is to, walk along the beach or being out in nature. but we still, as a culture, see nature as something separate from us. We don't experience ourselves as nature. And partly, that's, of course, a lot of philosophy or even certain religion, hold nature as this dirty,
Yeah.
this raw, dirty something that we need to subjugate and make work for us, right? But there's also, because most of us, we live constantly in roofed places, and then we go to work in driving in a car, subway, train, then we work in a factory, a clinic, or again, like sort of a shelter place, roofed. So rarely we are really exposing ourselves to the raw elements. And there's something, not just exposing ourselves to us, but starting to have a conversation with nature. Not in the sense of, oh, this tree is so lovely, but talking to a tree being.
I do that.
When, yeah,
I do that.
right? Yes, lovely.
Yeah.
So when we are with nature, or a river, really treating this nature being is a sentient, animate something, right? And what happens when we start doing that, I find like the sense of being so separate already sort of fizzles more out. And we tap into a sense of aliveness, right? You speak again about the energy body. We tap into that moment, into that energy body of nature, but which is also ours, right? Because we are not as separate as it all appears to be. And a beautiful practice from that lineage I've been studying with from the Andes is, for instance, when you take a breath. So often we speak about mindful breathing, but maybe next time, not just mindful breathing on your meditation cushion or with your eyes closed, when you're out and you take that mindful breath and then turning, whether it's the sky or maybe there's a tree, something in nature or the sun, and taking in not just the breath, but imagining and feeling. And I say imagining, for me, it's reality. But you take in this refined energy. It's called Sami in Quechua. So taking in this love and really allowing it to come in like a nourishment. And when you exhaling that love back, or the gratitude and the awe. And this is, again, another very simple practice of finding beauty and breathing in beauty in our everyday life, just a few minutes. And that also helps to rewire, this negative biased brain that we all have that tends to get stuck on problems and what's wrong with me and what's wrong with you.
Yeah. And you can do this anywhere. Even if you live in the middle of New York City, there's nature. And
Exactly.
I have to say that I am at fault of not connecting more. I feel a lot that I'm in a bubble, especially now that today we have 2 feet of snow. But the first thing I do every morning is I walk outside and I say good morning and
Yes.
whatever's out there. And one of my practices is I love the moon energy, so I actually
Mm,
step outside and I look at the moon and I open my arms and I feel that energy that you were talking about, that love and that connection that I feel,
mm.
oh, it's, a part of me because we all are a
Yes.
part. We're
Yeah.
all connected.
Interwoven. Yeah.
Yeah. And I do hope that, and I feel that there's more of a move towards connecting with nature and feeling more grounded. I hope there is because I feel there is. I hope there is. And I thank you for bringing nature up. It's so important.
Mm.
And I do talk to trees. They talk to me first.
Mm-hmm.
And so I listened and we talk.
Mm-hmm.
And so important because there is this mystery and this mystical, but they're also teachers. I feel that the
Yeah.
nature in and of itself is
Yes.
a teacher.
I
Thank you for
agree.
bringing that up. Thank you. I know you have some offerings in Costa Rica as well, and perhaps some online things. Can you share a little bit about what you do offer?
Sure. Thank you. I offer online on Sunday mornings every 2 or 3 weeks, depending a little bit like how busy my schedule is. Every 2 or 3 weeks on Sunday mornings, I offer an hour free online class where I guide meditation for 25 minutes. And then the space is open. I don't do any recordings. People share from the heart what they're struggling with or what they maybe need to unpack or question about practices. Everything is welcomed and it's lovely. It is a very respectful, caring community, I feel. And then I just was teaching for the last few weeks here at our retreat center in Costa Rica, Blue Spirit. I was teaching about embodied listening, different ways of listening inside, understanding the nervous system, but also how to unpack difficult experiences. And I have a big retreat always in December. This upcoming December, the retreat is called Boundaries, Being and Belonging, which I could teach with an amazing colleague, trauma therapist. So where we go really deep into that sense of self, but also learning boundaries and working with, the early attachment experience, that inner self model that might feel like I'm not good enough or I'm not, I'm unlovable and so on and so forth. So to lift that up more and more and coming more into that genuine sense of self, that our deep innate completeness and okayness. So that's something.
That's a wonderful topic to talk about boundaries. And I think, especially
Mm,
for women, I write about it as well. Boundaries are
yes.
important to protect our
Yes.
energy, right? And
Yeah.
value who
Yeah.
we are. It's part of that
All right.
self-worth concept.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Wonderful.
And yeah.
Yeah. And did you want to say something else? I thought,
Oh, I wanted to say something more about boundaries, but
no,
it's
go ahead. Go.
because it's so interesting, right? It's even boundaries, of course there are physical boundaries and sexual boundaries, but even these boundaries of like, no, this is what is true for me, right? The boundaries, learning to honor when we actually feel a no versus reflexively saying yes and over accommodating, right? Which is a big collective conditioning for many women these days. So there's a sense of boundaries. What is really
Yeah.
true for me? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I teach that as well. Really
Lovely.
important. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I know that you have a website, AnnetteKnopp.com. I'll put
Mhm.
everything in the show notes. So there's all that.
Thank you.
And I'll also put a link to your book, Mystic Nomad, A Woman's Wild Journey to True Connection. And I have my copy here and I have underlined so many things and have notes. It is an amazing book. So I encourage
Thank you.
anyone to buy that as well. As thank you. I honor your presence and your time here and your
Mm.
teachings. Thank you so much, Annette.
Thank you, Rose, for having me. Thank you.